One of the reasons why I took about every class I could with Dr. Light is because he had a way of getting a hold of my giggle box, making me laugh. Maybe when I shouldn't, but I did. But I love Dr. Light, and it's kind of a no-brainer when Alan gave me the invitation, because I'm like, hey, I can go crash with him and Miss Light and spend a little time with them. This, I think, is my first time to be here, so that's nice. And I hope that by the time I'm out of here, you'll at least think, hey, I'm glad he came, I'm glad he didn't waste my time. There were two guys, I want to say this, though. Bible does teach reconciliation. If you feel like somebody's done something, against you, it's good to go to them and just say, listen, what you've done here, I didn't like it. Why did y'all send Greg and Janet to us? Yeah. I hope he's watching tonight. Y'all wouldn't know this. You'd have no reason to know this. But Greg has been an encourager of mine for quite some time through Facebook messaging. His son, Jim, is a deacon at Pulaski Street. So that's how I met Greg and Janet. And since meeting them there in Lawrenceburg, when they came to visit Jim and worship with us, he'll always send me, it might be something funny, or it might be something real serious, just to encourage you. But he told me to watch out for Jim Harris and Larry McDuffie. He said, if you can stay away from them, be in your best interest. But that's like the first two people I came in contact with when I walked in here. So we're going to talk about a portion of the Sermon on the Mount. If you're not challenged by the Sermon on the Mount, you're dead, right? I mean, you're just dead. You might be living dead, but it is a tour de force. And there's a reason why people refer to the Sermon on the Mount as the greatest sermon that's ever been preached. Because around every corner, you're having to pick your jaw off the ground. You are humbled by it. You're challenged by it. At times encouraged by it. I try to imagine if I was just, an average Jew on the hillside / mountainside listening to Jesus preach this sermon, about the part where he said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. That's when my jaw's going to drop. Because if I'm an average Jew at that time and I think about the Pharisees, I'm thinking, wow, those guys got it figured out, right? They are so righteous. They are so holy. And then Jesus drops that on you. And you're going, well, how do we go above that? And it's interesting, right? That's where he wants to get into more of the spirit of the law than just the bold black letters of the law. The writing. He wants to get at motivation. He wants to get at the heart. And that's a big part of the Sermon on the Mount. And so tonight, we're going to have to go to meddling a little bit, right? Because we're going to have to talk about something that a lot of people keep a pretty tight grip on. And that has to do with your stuff, your money, your treasure, as it were. A typical American now makes the kind of money that would have seemed extravagant a generation or so ago. And what we do with that money doesn't seem so extravagant. I mean, you guys, I was born in 1979, so I'm 45 years old. I remember having landlines in the house. And those landlines weren't all that expensive. $20 gets you a landline with those ridiculously long cords, right? But today, and some of you will disagree with this, but I'm going to say those that are my age and younger, maybe just even a little older than me, if I asked you, hey, do you think your $1,000 computer in your pocket is a necessity? You would be like, I kind of think it is. I kind of think I need to have it to live in this world. Y'all just, isn't that ridiculous? Like, we got it in our heads that $1,000 phone, a smart, it's not just any phone. And I still have an elder that has a flip phone, okay? And I love it. I'm like, man, I hope you keep that flip phone till you die. Just as I don't know, it's like a silent protest, right? But we get it in our heads, and it's like a car. We're like, we kind of need more than one car, or a TV, there's still some got one TV, but most of you, more than likely, if I came to your house to visit, or if you came to my house to visit, you're going to find probably multiple TVs, right? It's just interesting. As our income perhaps has increased, the things that we think are necessary seems to kind of increase along with our income, right? And then when that stuff wears out, we hardly give a thought to replacing it with something bigger and better and faster or whatever. It's just kind of what we do. It's just kind of how we do it. There is the word consumerism. If you were to look that up in Merriam's dictionary, Merriam-Webster, you're going to get 3 definitions generally. First one's going to go like this: the promotion of the consumer's interests. Number 2, the theory that an increasing consumption of goods is economically desirable. But then I want you to listen to this third one, this third definition that you'll find in one of your, in one of our dictionaries: a preoccupation with an inclination toward the buying of consumer goods. And this latter definition, I think, gets at what a lot of theologians mean when they use the word consumerism. So, for instance, one writer assesses that consumerism normally, and I quote, suggests an inordinate concern, some might even say an addiction, with the acquisition, possession, and consumption of material goods and services. Another writer by the name of Mark Buchanan, he depicts it as the cult of the next thing. And I'm like, boy, that's a way to put it, right? And he even says that it has its own litany of sacred terms like more and you deserve it, new, faster, cleaner, brighter. Another writer by the name of Rodney Clapp, he just, and it's real pithy, he refers to consumerism as the deification of dissatisfaction. And I'm like, man, that stings a little bit. Am I satisfied with what I have? Am I content with what I have? Am I grateful for what I have? Or am I increasingly dissatisfied, discontent, right? Here's a couple other things I wanted to share with you. Try long-lasting consumerism. Feeling low, down in the dumps, blue, consumerism has what it takes to put a smile back on your face. Using a patented method of irrational buying and acute materialism, consumerism makes you happy every single time. Here's another one. Consumerism for beginners. Look, honey, I bought something today. Oh, darling, I am so proud of you. All right? Here's the next one. Won't last long. Get yours today, just $9.95. That's right, just $9.95. Golly, I'm not sure exactly what these are. And then she says, but at that price, we better buy 2. Right? What about you'll notice in the bottom corner that it's called the rat race. You see that? It's like, hey, work harder. Happiness is just around the corner. You get around the corner. Earn more money. Happiness is just around the corner. Buy more things. Happiness is just around the corner. Hey, keep going. Happiness is just around the corner. Time to upgrade, 7G, right? Here you go, don't be left behind. Some of our younger kids are aware of FOMO, fear of missing out, right? As it's called, it's this idea that if I don't get what everybody else is getting, I'm somehow less than. I'm somehow behind. And so marketers know this. They know how to get people, make them feel subpar, right? And then you'll get them to buy. This one is my favorite, Black Friday. Because only in America people trample others for sales exactly one day after being thankful for what they already have. Right? It's pretty good. Spot the addict. Lies, steals, ruins other people's lives, anything to get a hold of more. Lies, steals, ruins other people's lives, anything to get a hold of more. What's greed? What's covetousness? It's just wanting more and more and more of what you have enough of already. That's what it is. And I think that in our passage, Matthew 6, 19 through 24, I think that, not that at this time he was like, hey, what I'm about to say in this Sermon on the Mount is really going to go after those folks living in the 21st century or whatever, but because people had problems with this. I mean, this is an old problem, right? But he does. In these passages, he really confronts the consumer culture that we live in. Big time. I mean, hits it head on. And ought to give us pause. So here's what he says. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I don't think that we have to think too long or too hard to appreciate what Jesus is saying here. By the way, let me just add this little tidbit of information. 16 of the 38 recorded parables of Jesus deal with your relationship to money. That always gets me. It's almost as if Jesus knew what one of the main contenders for our attention and our worship even might be. That he saw this as a danger. Because Jesus rarely talks about money as how it can necessarily be a good or what. He often casts it in terms that money is one of Satan's favorite traps that can ensnare anybody. Right? It's like the day you think you're immune to that is the day you better check yourself. Right? So, understand that this section, is representative of a lot of other things that Jesus said, and we'll bring in some of the other stuff, but we're going to try to focus on what he says specifically in the Sermon on the Mount. So, what Jesus says about earthly treasure makes a lot of sense, and I think our own lives prove the wisdom of his words. While most of our houses and businesses are quite secure, robberies still happen, okay? Rust, it's still a reality. I know this because I got 3 kids. We buy them a bike. Like I remember we bought them each a bike. There was the bigger one for my daughter, a medium-sized one for my son, and a real small one with training wheels for my youngest son. And it's just depressing what happens to those things within 8 months, right? Especially the one we got for my daughter that was white and the rust got to it outside or on our porch there's all kinds of toys that get left outside if you got kids that just rust gets in there. I don't know so much if we have as much a problem with moths today. Moths do exist. I will tell you, this is kind of embarrassing, but hey, I was a kid and I didn't know better. My parents in their house, we had my brother's bedroom's here, it's over here. We had these closets, and I'm not kidding you, the closets connected one another in the back. It was an old house. So stuff would get put back there, clothes. One day we're back there playing around, and this little white ball rolls out from a box of clothes. And as a little kid, I'm like, it's a little white ball, looks like a piece of candy. I'm going to put that thing in my mouth. You ever put a mothball in your mouth? I mean, the hair just stood up on the back of my neck thinking about that moment in time, right? But we understand that the stuff we got here wears out, breaks down, doesn't last. So Jesus isn't saying anything here that somebody's like, I would like to protest, right? It's just it's just easy to see. The problem that Jesus is identifying here isn't so much wealth per se or money per se. This is where we do the obligatory, guys. Money is not intrinsically evil in and of itself, right? It's the love of money that is the problem, according to Paul, right? Money can be instrumentally good or evil depending on how you use it. What Jesus really, again, gets at is what does your relationship to your stuff look like? And his words stand as a challenge here, right? Do not lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Well, what's he getting at there? Because it does seem like good sense and a wise use of money. It's certainly a better use of money than other alternatives to actually save some money, right? I mean, we have this thing we call retirement if we live long enough. And I'm sure many of you, way back when, tried to be quite wise in the use of your money. And we also acknowledge some of the crazy things that go on in our society. For instance, it's become almost a cliche, the lottery winner that within a matter of like years is what? Bankrupt. Got nothing. According to Sports Illustrated, 78% of NFL players find themselves bankrupt or financially stressed within 2 years of leaving the league. 60% of NBA players are broke within 5 years of walking off the court. And we think about the inordinate amount of money that we give our athletes in this society. And you know as good as I do that the reason why they're broke and the reason why they're financially stressed is not because they just decided to get way too generous with their money. We know that what happened to it is they were buying a bunch of junk in the grand scheme of things. And so there is this sense in which they should have laid up some treasure on earth. We understand that. But what Jesus is getting at is in the sense of ultimately speaking, that earthly treasure is not a cure-all, right, for the human condition. And this is where our problem lies. We have been told that we need to achieve financial independence, that we need to achieve financial security, that money will secure our future, and that if given enough time, the stock market always goes up. And Jesus identifies a couple of problems with this. One, it doesn't always work. Things happen. People betray you. Jobs disappear. Investments collapse. There are still robberies. There are still, rust, and there's still moths, okay? And there are still recessions, and there's still depressions. And then there's floods, and there's tornadoes. Does not mean that we should not have wealth, but it does mean that we should recognize how tenuous our wealth is, how volatile it is, and how dependent it is on so many things and variables going our way, and how it can, in fact, easily evaporate. Here's the second problem. This will probably make you chuckle a little bit. It never works. Right? You just said it doesn't always work. And now you're saying problem number 2 is it never works. Well, it doesn't ever work in the sense that, and you guys know this, right? And this really is something that comes from Paul. You remember this, right? you brought nothing into the world, guess what? You can't take anything out of this world. I mean, at the end of the day, all our financial security has nothing whatsoever to do with heavenly security. Isn't that correct? Do you really think you can buy your way into heaven? Now, there might be some people that think, hey, man, I've amassed such a fortune. When I get to those old pearly gates or to the judgment day, I'll just pay God off. That is the definition of a fool. Because last time I checked, he like owns the universe, right? And whatever you're offering him, there really isn't much in the grand scheme of things. So there is this sense in which this is never going to work, because treasure on earth will necessarily not last long enough. It will not last into the next life. But the treasure in heaven, now that's what endures. That's what lasts. It can't be five-finger discounted. It is fireproof, and heavenly treasure is waterproof. It's secure forever. And in light of 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19, this is another passage I like to bring up in conjunction with what Jesus said. You get the impression that maybe, I realize the Holy Spirit's at work here, but you get the impression that Paul might have spent some time thinking about, in some way or another, some of the things that Jesus preached. Because he's about to say some things that are very much like what Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount. But I want you to notice when he comes out of the gate, and he goes, okay, as for the rich in this present age, question, what is your definition of rich? Because this is what happens sometimes with us. As for the rich in this present age, well, I hope those rich people out there listen to this. They better take heart to what Paul's about to say here. And what we do is we conveniently excuse ourselves from what Paul is about to say here. So let me drop this truth bomb, okay? I would say that if you're listening to my voice right now in this rather nice facility, say the majority of you are rich. What if I told you that if your household income is $37,000 a year, that you're going to make it into about the top 5% of the world in terms of wage earners? You see, you can't just look at this from like just the city of Crossville or the state of Tennessee. You need to get global in your thinking here. And when you get global in your thinking, we got it quite well, right? We do. We do. We have a lot of what we might call, you might call them first world problems, or you might can call them rich people problems. Like, I can't get cell coverage. It's a rich person problem, right? Here's another one. I can't decide where I want to eat. We've been driving down this strip looking for a place to eat for the last 20 minutes, and I can't decide if I want Mexican, if I want to get some Italian, or if I'd like to do the good sushi joint over there. Or, you know what this is? It's a rich person problem. Computer crash, slow internet, car trouble, flight delay, Amazon doesn't have your size, all rich people problems. And next time there's a watering ban in your neighborhood, it's like, hey guys, you need to kick back on your use of water. Just know that there are a lot of women, especially women, that carry jugs of water on their heads for miles just so they can have drinking water and can cook. They have to walk out there to get it, and they got to walk back. And then it would blow. They can't even fathom the fact that we have so much extra water that we're just spraying it on our lawns. Right? So when you read this, don't you go, that's for Bill Gates. No, it's not. And you'll see there's two problems. Two problems that Paul highlights here. Charge them not to be what? Haughty. You know, that's a great word to say, right? Sometimes I make my congregation say a word. We won't do that here, but it is kind of comical. Haughty, right? What does that mean? Arrogant. You ever met an arrogant rich person? You know, what happens? Some people think that just by virtue of having more, that somehow they become worth more than others. And their opinion of themselves rises with their income level. And then he also says that another problem people have, you know, is it's okay to have hope and riches. The problem is people put their hope in riches, right? That's the problem. And which Paul says is a very uncertain footing. I mean, that's not something that is at all stable. But a lot of people like, if I can just get this stack big enough, I can lean into it, I'll be secure, I'll be satisfied. And what they find is that the stack just is never quite big enough, strong enough. And then what he says in verses 18 and 19 echoes Jesus. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. See, when you come back to what Jesus said here, you notice he doesn't get very specific about what it looks like to lay up treasure in heaven. You see that? He just says, don't lay up treasure on earth, okay? Do lay up treasure in heaven. Paul kind of gives us an idea, right? If we had to summarize it, it would be generous with your money. You know, like, here's the word, share. Be generous with your talent. You know, there's things that you can do that can certainly be a benefit to another human being. Be generous with your time. I remember hearing one preacher preach on this one time, and it got me good. He goes, man, if you're asking what is more valuable, giving money to something or giving your time to something, right? He goes, well, like in Mission Works, we can send our money overseas. We can send our money all over the place, but you can't send your time and not send you also, right? And you got to go. If you're going to give your time to something, you got to go and get in the middle of that. Now, you go back earlier in the Matthew 6, 1 through 18 passage, you know, that's about rewards for righteousness, and it's the idea you're only going to get one reward, and that reward's either going to come from God or that reward's going to come from man. And the first thing he talks about in this same context is giving of alms, right? Helping those that are in need. That would certainly apply. That's one way to store up, right? Treasure in heaven. Here's a little axiom that I really like. What you share with others, God stores for you. What you distribute to others, God gathers for you. That's a nice axiom that kind of helps you summarize, I think, in your mind what storing up treasure in heaven looks like. The next passage is one of those that seems like an intrusion in the text, because you're like, what has this got to do with what he's saying and what he's about to say? Well, the fact that he's talking kind of about treasure in the first part, he's going to talk about money right after this, and then as you know, probably next week you're going to talk about 25 through 34, and that's about not worrying about your needs and all of that. This passage is in a money treasure context, and so I think we need to view it in that way. So you read, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So what would a bad eye be in terms of treasure or money? Well, that's not hard to think about. That's going to be the greedy eye, right? That's going to be the eye that is sort of unable, right, to check itself. The lustful eye, the ungenerous eye, the eye that wants to acquire and store up and hoard, the eye that is attracted to shiny things. It's the eye that is very frankly self-centered. And when that's the case, it's going to affect all of you from the inside out. On the flip side, what would a good eye be? A good eye would be, in fact, the generous eye. The eye that sees, let's say, a person in need and doesn't mind reducing its own comfort for the sake of the comfort of others. You know, Deuteronomy 15, 7 through 11. Read that sometime. I mean, I know it takes us back into the old law. We don't have time to read it now, but Deuteronomy 15, 7 through 11, you'll see where Jesus is echoing some of the principles that are in that passage. And then we get to Matthew 6, 24. Now, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or you cannot serve God and money. And Paradise Lost, anybody familiar with that? Paradise Lost was written by John Milton. I will say sometimes we get confused, and I've noticed this in discussions with Satan. When a lot of people think about Satan's origin, they're thinking more about John Milton's Paradise Lost than they are Scripture. That's a good, lesson for another day. But in Paradise Lost, Mammon is one of the fallen angels who joined with Satan in his battle against God in this epic poem. And in the words of Milton, here's how he describes Mammon. He's the least erected spirit that fell from heaven. For even in heaven, his looks and thoughts were always downward bent, admiring more the riches of heaven's pavement, trodden gold, than aught divine or holy else enjoyed, and vision beatific is the way that Milton put it. The personification of Mammon as a god or evil goes back in Christianity a rather long way, at least to the 4th century. And it seems like many of them got their cue from Jesus here, where he is pitting God versus what we could argue that in Jesus' mind was the ultimate God substitute. Money, stuff, possessions. Mammon, that word doesn't show up a whole lot in your Bibles. It shows up here, shows up over in Luke 16. But Jesus' point is that you and I cannot serve God and money at the same time. We have to choose. The fundamental notion of Christians, and this goes back to Judaism, y'all have heard of this before, monotheism, right? That there is one God, and He alone is the one that we should worship, and He alone is the one that we should serve. And that's what Jesus, in quoting Deuteronomy, told Satan in that great temptation, right? That showdown in the desert with the devil. Serving our stuff, spending our time thinking about our stuff, caring for our stuff, honoring our stuff, and acquiring more and more stuff. I mean, that sounds a whole lot like idolatry. When that becomes our fixation, or when that becomes our ultimate focus. Paul links greed or covetousness with idolatry, explicitly so. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 5. He mentions what? He mentions covetousness, and then he puts in like a parenthesis, at least in most Bibles, which is idolatry. In the East, ancient Near East, modern East, anybody in here ever been to India? Some of you have done maybe some work over in the eastern part of the world. They still have their idols of wood, metal, and stone. We might call them superstitious idols. Here in the West, we have our more sophisticated idols. We have, y'all ready for this one? Politics. Want to hear another one? Sports. You want to hear another one? Health. And then, of course, wealth. We have our superstitious idols. We have our things and our people, even persons, that we kind of take God off the throne of our heart and we put something else or someone else on the throne that rightfully belongs to Him. You guys are aware of that financial crisis back in 2008, aren't you? I'll give you two stories here. Well, string of stories that all make the same point, and then I want to share a story about another family real quick. But after the global economic crisis began in mid-2008, there followed a tragic string of suicides. The acting chief financial officer of Freddie Mac, the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Company, hanged himself in his basement. The chief executive of Sheldon Good, a leading U.S. real estate auction firm, he shot himself in the head behind the wheel of his red Jaguar. A French money manager invested the wealth of many of Europe's royal leading families who had lost, I think, reportedly $1.4 billion of his clients' money in the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. He slit his wrists and died in his Madison Avenue office. A Danish senior executive with HSBC Bank hanged himself in the wardrobe of his 500-pound-a-night suite in Knightsbridge, London. When a Bear Stearns executive learned that he would not be hired by J.P. Morgan Chase, which had bought his collapsed firm, he took a drug overdose and leapt from the 29th floor of his office building. A friend said, "This Bear Stearns thing just broke his spirit." The string of suicides, by the way, is grimly reminiscent of what happened in 1929. Now, we can dig down all day. Why did he do this? Why did he do that? And you could just about boil it down to one thing. Somebody made way too much about money. There is a difference between sorrow and despair. These people despaired when they lost their stuff. But other people didn't do that. There was a couple when I was in East Tennessee that they lost 3 businesses. They had a beautiful home. They had one of those awesome big RVs. You know, they lost every bit of it. Every bit of it. They went from a beautiful house with a pool, right? And I'm just going to tell you, it wasn't that he was, dumb. It wasn't that he was greedy. It was just horrific. The string of things that happened in 2008 that took him under financially and took him and his wife under. But I'll tell you, man, it didn't change them. It didn't affect them the way that it affected so many other people. They went into their house, much smaller, and even found you know what, this is actually better. I think this is actually a blessing. Can you believe that? This is actually a blessing in disguise. It's going to free us up to do a little bit more for Christ's church. Their whole attitude, the opposite. Well, why is that? They had not made the mistake that so many in this world make. They had not made the mistake of serving mammon instead of God. Nice, thanks for your attention, and I hope that that is sufficiently challenging. Okay?
All things praise thee, Lord Most High, heaven and earth and sea and sky. All word for thy glory made, that thy greatness such marking books number 29 of the Psalm of Meditation. Number 9, Wonderful Savior. We'll sing the first, second, and last verse. A wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord, a wonderful Savior to me. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, where is the pleasure I see. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, what shadows of darkness land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and loves me never in His hand. And loves me never in His hand. A wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord. He takes my burden away. He holds me up, and I shall not be moved. He gives me strength as I day. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows such darkness land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there in His hand, and covers me there in His hand. When clothed in His righteousness, transported I rise to meet Him in clouds of the sky. His perfect salvation, His wonderful love, I'll shout with millions on high. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows such darkness land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there in His hand, and covers me there in His hand.
One way to measure the power and depth and genuineness of a person's love is to observe to what degree that person is willing to be inconvenienced by another. How much inconvenience are they willing to voluntarily endure? How much are they willing to sacrifice for the person that they love? I would say, even now, that there are probably more than a few of you that might be in a caretaking role right now of some kind, or recently came out of a caretaking role. You know, newsflash, your parents don't stay young, right? They get older. They get potentially more dependent. Maybe they need a daughter or a son to take care of them, to help them. And let's just be honest, it's not easy. Caretaking is among the more difficult things because, boy, does it not really test your selfishness meter. It's late at night, it's 2 o'clock. I need you to come over, and you're thinking, I would rather stay here and sleep, and I got to get up and do this tomorrow. But because you love them, you get out of bed, you go over there to check on them, see about them. Or maybe they end up in the hospital. It's like intermittent. They're in the hospital, they get to come back home, they go back to the hospital, come back home. And you go to the hospital, and you sit with them all through the night, and then you get the dreaded news, you're staying another night. Okay, here we go. Night 2, right? Night 3. By night 3, it's time to go home and get a shower, maybe a change of clothes, find somebody else that's willing to go and sit with them, and then at some point you relieve them and you go back. We get this whole thing of inconvenience. What you're willing to endure for somebody can really demonstrate your love. So to kind of tie this in with what we were talking about in class relative to money and stuff and treasure on earth versus treasure in heaven. What do you think about this? 2 Corinthians 8, verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. Possibly, as far as an earthly example goes, we could imagine maybe the richest person on earth who is living in a nation on earth that enjoys incalculable amounts of wealth, perfect health, unbelievable peace. Imagine that person trading that kind of life and entering the poorest country on earth. He's living the rest of his existence in a country ravaged by disease and by poverty and war, voluntarily putting himself in the middle of all of that to help the people of that country. That kind of sacrifice is really hard for us to imagine, right? That somebody would trade this for that. But when you think about the story of Jesus, I will remind you, he didn't just change countries, guys. I mean, the text says he was rich and he became poor. We can't quite fathom. Honestly, we won't be able to understand what he gave up until we get there. Don't you agree? We can't fully appreciate and understand what he gave up to come here. And then we got to remind ourselves who he came here for. I will remind you that you were not innocent. I will remind you that you weren't particularly lovely. According to Romans 5, when he gave his life for us, there's this sense in which we could be described as weak, we could be described as ungodly, we could be described as sinners, we could be described even as enemies. But he came from this unimaginable existence, and he came right here in the middle of all of this, entering creation, becoming one with his creation, taking on all our poverty and our sickness and our troubles, and he put himself in harm's way. So one of the things I like to tell people when I want them to consider God, or I want them to consider Jesus, is I remind them that you don't ever get to say that God doesn't love you. You can never say that. You can say it, but it isn't true. Because when we see the level he was willing to be inconvenienced, when we see the level of the sacrifice that he was willing to make, we can't help but conclude that he loves us more than we can even wrap our minds around. And I would argue that when somebody comes to realize that, to appreciate that, to really grasp that, they can't stay where they're at. It's a kind of love that demands a response. And then that is an opportunity you have tonight. Perhaps you're not a follower of Christ, who, I will remind you, left the riches of heaven to become poor for you. For you. Maybe you're not a follower of his, and you're wanting to do that tonight. You can come with a heart full of faith, penitent of your sins, willing to confess that he was everything he claimed to be, and to be immersed in water, reenacting his death and his burial and his resurrection. And when you come up out of that water, you get a new family, you get a new master, you get a new destiny. All because, ultimately, all because of what he did for you that you could not do for yourself. And of course, your response to that, or maybe you do follow Christ. You have been following Christ for a long time, but you've lost sight of the way. And you need prayers of forgiveness, or you need prayers of encouragement this evening. If we can help you in one way or another, come now together, we stand and sing.
Oh, to Jesus I surrender, all to Him I freely give. I let love and trust Him, in His presence daily live. I surrender Please be seated. We'll close with number 180. What we're going to do is we're going to sing the last verse of this song. God is love.